I will stand with you. Will you stand with me? And we will be the change that we hope to see.
So I get this email from the UUA saying, it's standing on the side of love, it's SSL month. And so everybody needs to be doing sermons on SSL. And to tell you the truth, I had to look twice and think about what SSL was. And I finally figured that out. And I realized that as I talked with people, there were several ideas around people who knew what standing on the side of love was and where it came from. And they were all different. So I thought, well, maybe we need to talk about this a little bit. As far as I know, the first time this sort of came into our consciousness was when the state of Massachusetts was considering legalizing gay marriage. And if you don't know, the UUA Intergalactic Headquarters, 25 Beacon Street in Boston, is next door to the state capitol. So we could hang this big banner out, and they came over and they were interviewing Bill Sinkford, who at that time was president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And he told a reporter that we UUs were standing on the side of love. Now, at that moment, Jason Shelton, who was the minister of music at the First Unitarian Church of Nashville, was there on other business, and it caught him. So he rushed over and found the piano and sat down, and before the afternoon was out, had written Standing on the Side of Love, which has almost become an anthem of ours now, and we will sing it at the end of this service. Other people have told me, oh, well, this is something that Bill Sinkford came up when there was the shootings in Knoxville, because they had heard him tell reporters that the people from the UUA were down there and they were standing on the side of love with the people in Knoxville. And now a lot of people think it has to do with justice for migrants, whether they're documented or not. It has something to do with the yellow T-shirts, because we started seeing standing on the side of love buttons and standing on the side of love T-shirts, which there was an action in Phoenix a year or so ago where people came from all over the country to protest the terribly oppressive bill that had been passed. And many of them were Unitarian Universalists and had on these yellow T-shirts that said standing on the side of love. So they would know who they were arresting. Our current president, Peter Morales, was there, of course, and his press person kept trying to get interviews with him or for him, and nobody seemed to be interested in talking to the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. And so in desperation, the press person finally says, would you like to talk to the leader of the yellow T-shirt people? And they all wanted to. Because they had become such a presence. And people look, and here were these mostly, middle-class, middle-aged Anglos running around Phoenix in the middle of the summer for something, and they would look at us as, what does this have to do with you? You're not Hispanic. You're not a migrant, and you're here standing with us. And it made a big difference to a lot of people, and it was probably some of the best publicity we ever got. But what worries me is now people start talking about SSL and SSL month, which is supposed to be from Martin Luther King's birthday to Valentine's Day, which is nice. But when I hear about the months, I keep thinking about back in the 60s and 70s when a lot of people in this country started getting their voice, and all of a sudden we created Black History Month and gave them February. I heard a lot about that. Oh yeah, February, great. Us and the groundhog, shortest month. This is what we get. We get the little one. And of course, right behind African Americans were women, so we gave them March. There's no other holidays in March. And what we're seeing now, though, is what this has become is during March, school teachers put up bulletin boards, and they've got kites, and they've got shamrocks, and they have a few token famous women. Is SSL going to be an acronym and a month that we forget what it's about? Is it a flash in the pan? Well, where does it come from? That's why the title of the sermon is not Standing on the Side of Love, it's Standing on the Side of Love, ... Why? If you ever took one of my classes, you would know that's my favorite question. I don't care who did what, when, where, and how. I want to know why it happened. Well, we didn't just start doing this. I mean, Unitarians and Universalists, this was before the merger mostly, were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. Of course, it's kind of easy for us because what happened was a lot of Unitarian and Universalist clergy, when they saw what was going on in Selma and Birmingham, got on their airplanes and flew down south and stayed there for a while, and we were able to end de jure segregation. Segregation by law. Then they got on their airplanes and they went back. Of course, there was no trouble at home where there was merely de facto segregation and racism. We were heavily involved in the social gospel movement of the early 20th century, where lots of churches, all kinds of denominations, were involved in the work of social justice. If you ever watch the movie Glory and wonder about those white officers or those black units, well, I'll tell you one thing they almost all had in common. They were Unitarians. We were heavily involved in the abolitionist movement. And if you go a little further back, in the 1830s, I mean, when I get to the 1830s teaching American history classes, it's just one reform movement after another. And there's somebody who's leading the reform movement, and it's Clara Barton or Dorothea Dix or Horace Mann, and they're all Unitarians and Universalists. So we've been at this for a long time. But where does this impulse come from? Whence the imperative to do social justice? So something should be obvious already, and let me just say it. Our desire for social justice has nothing to do with the 60s. It has nothing to do with political liberalism. And it has nothing to do with not liking Republicans. I know a lot of people who, I'm for this because they're against it, and vice versa. Now for you personally, it might. I know a lot of people who are heavily involved in social justice issues, and it's things they came to in the 60s when they felt moved and they haven't stopped. So you personally, that may be true, and if so, great. You're doing it for a positive reason. I'm happy for that. But that's not what it is with Unitarian Universalists, because we are a religion, not a political movement. We are apolitical. The desire for us comes from a conversation with our heritage, from a conversation with our tradition historically, and even from the sources of our tradition, which is, yes, Scripture. Think about that quote I just gave from Martin Luther King. Who's he talking about? Amos, along with Isaiah, the first of the great Hebrew prophets. Jesus, the incarnation of love. Paul, a man who saw himself as an apostle of the incarnation of love. Martin Luther, who helped start the Reformation and spread out authority. John Bunyan, the famous Puritan. Thomas Jefferson, who embodied the Enlightenment in America and articulated a path to freedom and equality. And Abraham Lincoln, who tried to make it real in the here and now. It's a very long trajectory that we have. And as Theodore Parker said, he believed that the arc of the universe bent inevitably towards justice. And King quoted him constantly. Quoted him so much that on the New King Memorial, it has that quote up there. The difference is, when King did it, being a good scholar, he always cited Theodore Parker, the Unitarian minister. It's not cited on the monument. But that's a lot of words for a stone monument. You can only carve so much. Our whole idea of social action is rooted in the fundamental principle of Judaism. And I've said it before, and you'll hear me say it again if you're ever around me, that I believe that Unitarian Universalism is part of a 2,000-year-old Jewish reform movement. Comma. And I can go on from there. And I'm going to read you, a sentence and a paragraph from one of the real standard works on world religions. My copy is so old that it still has the original title, The Religions of Man, which Houston Smith eventually changed. I can't remember the new title. But now, it's not just The Religions of Man. There's another gender there. And so I'm going to start with one sentence, the last sentence in one paragraph, and go in and read a whole paragraph. And I think you'll catch where it's going pretty quick. He starts off, this insight. Well, you'll figure out what it was. This insight caused Lucretius, a short distance around the Mediterranean in Rome, to preach atheism on grounds that are actually religious. If the gods are, as the Romans believe them to be, immoral, vindictive, and capricious, meaningful existence requires that they be denied. The God of the Jews possessed none of these traits, which in greater or lesser degree characterize the religions of their neighbors, or the gods of their neighbors. It is here that we come to the supreme achievement of Jewish thought, not in its monotheism as such, but in the character it ascribed to the God it discovered to be one. The Greeks, the Romans, the Syrians, and most of the other Mediterranean peoples would have said two things about their gods' characters. First, the gods tend to be amoral. Second, towards man, they are preponderantly indifferent. The Jews reversed the thinking of their contemporaries on both points. Whereas the gods of Olympus tirelessly pursued beautiful women, the god of Sinai watches over widows and orphans. While Mesopotamia's Anu and Canaan's El were going their aloof ways, Yahweh was speaking the name of Abraham, lifting the heartsick exiles out of Babylon and his people out of slavery. God is the God of righteousness, whose loving kindness is from everlasting to everlasting, and whose tender mercies are over all the world. Now, let me say right off that if you read Scripture enough, you'll see that that is the main thrust, but there's always a counter thrust. There are people talking about, the God of creation, but there's also a counter thrust as the God of empire. And this confuses a lot of people, and sometimes they can't tell the two apart, but that's another sermon. Maybe 2 or 3. So we're not going to go there, but this was the main thrust. This is the heart of Judaism. Jesus and his followers were Jews through and through. It keeps coming. This is where it goes back to. When we trace it back, that's where we end up. Now, to stand on the side of love is to understand love as did people like Jesus and the Unitarians and the Universalists and the Baptist preacher Martin Luther King. They would point to 1 John 4. God is love. That's what it was to them. And many others. And that's all through scriptures. So they thought God is love, and that is also God or love, whatever you want to call it, is that which is greater than I. Something bigger than me. In fact, it might even be bigger than we. To stand on the side of love is to move beyond self-interest, to move beyond concern for my personal liberty. It's a very courageous step to take because you're going beyond just yourself. If we don't, if we have no common theology, then as blogger and UU minister Peter Gulata wrote recently, quote, "We've reinvented the Rotary Club for religiously inclined political liberals," unquote. If I want to support some cause because I think it's important and because that's on my agenda, then I don't need to come to church for that. There are lots of more effective political institutions. If I'm really concerned about the environment, I can join the Sierra Club. And I only have to go to meetings once a month instead of every week. And I can take my weekends and go hiking. If I'm really, really interested in equality for gays and liberals, I can join the National Gay Lesbian Task Force. They do really effective lobbying. So if it's just for political reasons, we don't really need to be here. But standing on the side of love will require more than politics and more than self-righteousness. The problem is a lot of political liberals in the 20th century gave up theology and replaced it with social justice and have weakened themselves in doing so. I mean, do you really think if the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s had been strictly a political social justice movement, that they would have made near the progress they did? I mean, it had been a social justice issue for 100 years. It had been a moral crisis for 350 years, and all the politics in the world had done virtually nothing. It was a religiously based movement with political goals. And I'm firmly convinced that's why they succeeded to the extent that they did. Because it was more than just politics. They were working for something that was much greater than any individual. It was even greater than their race. And that way they were able to bring in people who were not black. If it had been just African Americans, it would have never happened. There could only be racial equality when there are sufficient white allies. Just like there can never be women's equality until there are sufficient male allies. There can never be equality for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender until there are sufficient straight allies. It takes more than that. It must be bigger than any one person or any one group to be able to be successful. It has to be something bigger. Now, standing on the side of love also is not the same as standing on the sidelines of love. As I was writing this, Buffalo Springfield got into my head. And I was thinking to myself, must have been 1,000 people in the street, mostly singing songs and carrying signs, mostly saying, hooray for our side. It's kind of important, but I remember the bumper sticker, or the button that said, wearing buttons is not enough. Buttons and t-shirts and bumper stickers and hats are great. But where are you going to wear them? I mean, it's like if I have a UU shirt and I only wear it to church, what's the point? I need to wear it to the grocery store, where people can ask me, what's that shirt about? If you're really for some, if you want to, save the whales, you just don't wear it when you go swimming. You wear it to the grocery store, whatever it is that you're for. Because when you're standing on the side, when you're standing on the side of love, that's side by side where you can link arms with people who are different from you, who suffer oppressions that we cannot even imagine. And that's scary. But we can stand on the side of love, stand with other people, because love is greater than I. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than we. We stand with people, then we are facing the same dangers they are, even if only temporarily. Because most of the people we stand with, we really can't imagine what they face. And it's good for us to be with them, to try to understand better. So, why are we standing on the side of love? Well, we know it's bigger than us because otherwise, if it's not, it's merely the secular politics of self-interest, with a little self-righteous indignation thrown in for good measure. We stand on the side of love because to stand on the side of love is a religious worldview that impels us to justice, that impels us to act. It commands us. And because of that, we can't help it. We just have to do it. Because that's who we are. That's our faith. That's our core, not our politics. And that's the difference. And that's what I think standing on the side of love really is. It's not a slogan. It's not a month. It's not a t-shirt. It's a world view that is religious in its base. So may it be for us. Amen. Good.